I think we're going to get started then. If anybody does miss the start, then they can just catch up the start when they watch the recording later on. I see that people are not muted when they join the session. I'm not sure why. So maybe just double check yourself that you are in fact muted, please, so that we know that, like I say, we're not going to say something, what is the word, embarrassing when you are maybe talking to your colleagues. Right. Good. Right. I'm going to get started then. Dane, I'll just ask you to also just check that everybody is muted as they enter the room. Right. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a whole 50 people in the room, so that's fantastic. I almost want to congratulate you for arriving here. I said earlier on as well, we've tested these breakout rooms, but the first time you actually do it, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking to see, are the people going to arrive? So well done to you. Good. All right, so we're going to continue. We're going to talk about how are all these items applied in the probe audit methodology. And I am taking into account that we've got a much longer, if I say much longer, we've got a 15-minute or 16-minute recording also where we talk about the methodology. So you can also just go and have a look at the recording where we will talk in a little bit more detail about the methodology. All right. So let's start then. The probe audit methodology, as we said, it's an audit methodology. So what's fantastic about that is that it already incorporates the auditing standards, the international auditing standards, the latest standards, and that helps you then to have and to complete a compliant engagement. So I said earlier also that the Audit International methodology is mostly used by auditing firms in Africa. I am aware of clients that also use probe audit both in Africa but also internationally. I've got a client in the Bahamas that also uses it. So I always enjoy doing training for them. Yes, I sit in Cape Town in my home office, but I wish and dream about doing the training for them in the Bahamas, which obviously is never the case. All right, so one day we can always dream. Maybe you'll come and join me and you can go and do the audit and I'll go and do the training or something. I don't know. Good. Right, so the probe audit methodology. One of the biggest ways or things that makes the probe audit methodology different to other methodologies is almost this concept of being on a journey. And we always like to compare the methodology to almost using a GPS system. Now, whether that is in the old days, we used to have a Garmin, and I used to, when I did my training contract, I literally bought like this little block thing. It's almost like a mini tablet that we use to literally get directions of where to go. Because the alternative to that was using a map, and that wasn't always very efficient. And that was before we had smartphones. So yes, that was a long time ago. Today, you've got your smartphone, you can open up your application that tells you where to go. It helps you to get there in the most efficient way. And that's what we want to do in an audit. We want to get sufficient, appropriate audit evidence to get to the audit opinion, but in the most efficient way, without spending unnecessary time, and time is money, in getting to where we need to be. All right. So that is it. We want to get to our destination. Now, what is our destination? Our destination in the probe audit methodology is what we refer to as the desired audit risk. Here, some people talk about the DAR. So the desired audit risk is to say we have to, in terms of the auditing standards, get to the low audit risk. We need to get to an acceptably low audit risk to be able to sign off the audit. And the acceptably low audit level risk, that is what we refer to as the desired audit risk. How do we determine what acceptably low is? Well, that is what, when we take into account who are the users of the financial statements, very specifically, are those external users indicating an increased audit risk to us as auditors, saying someone's specifically going to rely on our audit methodology, on our audit report. Someone's specifically going to rely on our audit report, and we want to make sure that if they're going to look at these numbers, we are right. We didn't make a mistake. And who are those users? Why are they looking at the financial statements? And if they're looking at those financial statements let's say, for example, to invest in the business or to extend a loan or to increase an overdraft or any of those kind of things, there might be a bigger risk for us as auditors if we get it wrong. So we might want to actually reduce our audit risk because we know those users are going to rely on the financial statements. The other side to it is the going concern risk at the planning stage. Yes, at the planning stage, in the very first document, we already ask ourselves, are there any conditions or events that tell us this client might not actually be a going concern, that they should not be applying the going concern basis of accounting? If there are indicators, then that says to us, maybe the client's going to get these numbers wrong in their financial statements if they are not going to be a going concern. All right, but that's just the concept that we determine in the start of the audit. We discuss that in a lot more detail in planning the audit, level 2 of our audit series. And then this afternoon, we are actually starting level 3 at specifically discussing finalization, where we again consider going concern. But that then just for us in audit level 1, where we need to go and do field work to know what is this concept of desired audit risk and why is it there. All right, we've got 3 levels being acceptably low level of audit risk. The first one being low. Now listen to this. This is actually the highest level of low audit risk that we will accept to be able to sign off the audit report. Another level, if there is a little bit of uncertainty, we will go to very low desired audit risk, or if we are very uncomfortable because there are external users relying on the financials and there are going concern issues, then we will go with a minimum desired audit risk, saying we are going to go to the very, very lowest. We want to be super, super sure that we get the audit opinion correct. So that's your desired audit risk. That's the destination where we want to end up at the end of the audit. The next point then in your GPS system, in your trip advisor system, is to say, okay, but where are you now? So you want to go there. Where are you now? Because that will determine how far you have to go, and how far we have to go will also determine what is the best way for us to get there. So where are we in terms of the methodology? This is where we actually go and do our risk assessment. So here we determine the risk of material misstatement, and we go and say, how far do we then have to go? So you'll see on the slide, the very top level, that top line is almost like a red, what is that word now? Very dark red, I can't help thinking wine, red wine color. Burgundy is probably the right word. A burgundy color that says that's risk of material misstatement, and we need to travel all the way to the desired audit risk. So that's the level of audit risk. That's how far we need to travel. Now, just before we go to how do we travel, how do we get there, you'll notice a number of levels, a number of steps that we need to take. And of course, the auditing standard says we have to perform risk assessment procedures. And in performing those risk assessment procedures, we will determine that risk assessment. Few document references there. Yes, we consider whether items are material, either qualitatively material in terms of the number, so that's why we consider specific materiality, or in terms of quantitatively in terms of materiality, and qualitatively by nature or circumstances. So even if an item is not material in terms of the value, but it is material in terms of the nature of the information in the financial statements, we might still consider that to be a material item, and that will influence the potential risk of material misstatement if we identify a relevant assertion. So we'll then identify the risk of material misstatement, and from there, we will respond to that risk then through audit procedures. Right, now in the GPS, it will now say, okay, so you are in Durban, you want to get to Cape Town, how are we going to do that? And what is the most efficient way to do that? Now, different options. One option could be, well, just fly there. That's very expensive, but you're going to get here very quickly. You can go by ship, you can go by train, I guess, you can go by bicycle, you can even walk if you want to. Test every single item in the accounting records. It's going to take you forever, you're never going to get here, but eventually, like after, I don't know, 3 months or so, you might end up in Cape Town. But those are different options. So more efficient items, but probably more expensive, or what is the most efficient way to still get there in time, but not blowing the budget? All right, so now we've got this journey that we need to travel on, and we need to choose the best journey, the best route to get there. So in terms of the standards then, in terms of the methodology, we now have to bring this risk of material misstatement to the desired audit risk. And as with any road trip, any way that you need to go, if you're going to fly, you're going to have to fasten your seatbelt. You're not allowed to, say certain words or do certain things on the plane. If you're going to go in the car, you're going to have traffic rules. If you're going to go on the ship, there's going to be certain rules that you need to comply with. We're definitely not going to get into a rowboat. I can promise you that much. All right. So we want to now maybe say, like, we're going to drive. Let's drive. We're not going to take the bus. We're going to drive ourselves. On the road, there are traffic signs. There are road signs. And we need to comply with the rules of driving. So, for example, you've got to stick to the speed limit. You can't drive 180 kilometers an hour on the road. Right. But also at the same time, you can't just... I don't know, there will be some places where they're going to say they're going to check the speed limit. There will be some places that's going to say go slower here. There's a very sharp bend in the road, things like that. So we've got to comply with those traffic signs. What traffic signs do we have in the audit methodology? So you'll see these different purple colors of the blocks. Let's consider them. First of all, the first traffic sign in the probe methodology says, if you have a significant risk, right? In other words, if you have identified an assertion and you recorded a risk, then you have a significant class of transaction account balance or disclosure. That's that Scottabody. You assess the risk for that item. And if that risk is so high that you're saying it's significant, it means it needs special responses. You're not just going to do normal audit work. You need to actually specifically respond to that significant risk. Maybe select more items, something like that. So if you have a significant risk, you have to specifically respond to that risk. Secondly, controls, test of controls. If you want to rely on a control operating effectively throughout the period, you have to test the control to see if it was operating effectively throughout the control. Note, this is not just a walkthrough. This is actually saying we need to make sure that this control was working during the whole period that we want to rely on. So we're going to have to select a number of items, a sample of items, and test the control for operating. And then the last option, or the last rule rather, the traffic rule says that the assertions with risks recorded have to have procedures performed. Right. You have to perform all the procedures for that assertion. So maybe the work program is that we've recorded a risk for accuracy, and you open the work program for expenses, and there are 7, 8, 9 accuracy type of procedures. Do you have to perform all of them? Well, we need to just consider what was the reason for that risk and then respond to that. So the short answer is no, you don't have to perform all the procedures, but you have to still address that assertion and the reason for that assertion. All right, so that's your 3 traffic rules. Now, that might still not get you to where you need to be, just those 3 traffic rules, and you might still have to consider whether just driving down any road that comes up is the best one. When you think about, your journey and on your GPS, it might say, do you want to avoid toll roads? Do you want to go on the fastest route? Do you want to go on the scenic route? Things like that. So that also indicate where you're going to drive. And the same way with probe. So we're going to say, well, do you want to select a sample? Because then you're going to test more items. We're going to get more assurance. Or do you just want to do analytical procedures? Do you want to do just the material items and see if that gets you to where you need? So it's important there that you consider what is going to give you sufficient appropriate audit evidence. What will get you to your destination? Sometimes I might say, well, I only want to test the material items because I think I'm just going from, let's say, use my example of Durban, just going from Durban to Maritzburg. But actually, when I get to Maritzburg, I realize I'm not there yet. I actually wanted to be in Cape Town. So I've got to go a bit further. And that will then require me to do a bit more work. All right. So the way that we look at this in terms of the probe methodology then is to then use the upside down arrow on the right hand side is to say, well, audit procedures, the audit responses that we'll use the significant risk response. First audit rule, if you have a significant risk, you must have a response for that. Control test, if you have a control that you want to rely on, you have to test that control. Third, if you have an assertion, you have to do work for that assertion. And then we've got the other options in which to perform the procedures. that getting to the desired audit risk, have I reached my destination yet? That is indicated on the work program conclusion. So I've mentioned to you that we've included a special video for you in the second module about how to complete the work program conclusion. So I'm not going to talk too much about the work program conclusions because I know you're going to watch that video and it's going to give you a lot of information, but maybe just quickly. The top part of the conclusion lists a number of questions that helps you to consider audit requirements. For example, you've got to be alert to indicators of going concern events or conditions throughout the audit. Throughout the audit, well, every time you work on a work program, we're going to ask you, did you, in working through this section, identify going concern events? So read the questions carefully, think about your audit work, think about what you've learned in the section performing the work, and then respond to the answer appropriately. If you have to respond, it will prompt you to do that. It will sometimes ask you to comment, sometimes to raise a matter, maybe a report to management, things like that. Okay. And then next up is the little conclusion right at the bottom of where we link the methodology again. Just give me a second, please. Apologies. So how does this route that we've spoken about then link to the methodology and to the work program conclusion? So you'll see on the screenshot, there's a selection that I've made there to say either satisfactory or unsatisfactory. Right at the top, we start with the risk of material misstatement, the ROM. Where did we start out? That's our Durban in our journey. And then the different parts that we planned to perform. So in this case, we planned to perform, well, we didn't plan to perform any tests or controls. So in assurance obtained, we said, no, we didn't go past test or controls. Required procedures, we performed procedures. We even did some substantive sampling, and then we need to consider if we have reached our destination. So let's just think then about questions we ask ourselves. How far did we travel? How much assurance did we gain from the procedures performed? And what were the results of those procedures? So did they all work? Did everything work? Have we tested, what we needed to? Did we stop short of our destination? My example earlier of only reaching Maritzburg and not Cape Town yet. So the estimated audit risk remaining may not yet be at that level where I wanted to go. And also, we need to consider whether the untested balance, so if I only selected material items, how much of that balance is still left? If I tested material balance, let's say the inventory items or something like that, 2 million Rand of the inventory was material items, and I tested them. But the inventory balance makes up 20 million. There's another 18 million Rand that I didn't test. Now, if 2 million was already material, I can bet you the untested balance of 18 million is also material. And I cannot just stop because, well, this thing shows that I've reached my desired audit risk. I've still got 18 million Rand that's not tested. So I've got to apply my professional judgment, and surely I have to go and test that 18 million. It doesn't have to be all 18 million, but I have to go and perform more work to test that 18 million. All right, so I must reach the desired audit risk level here in the conclusion, and the video will explain to you in more detail, but also remember the untested balance and ask yourself if that was sufficiently tested. If it is less than performance materiality, basically, the chance is quite good that you've probably tested the balance sufficiently. All right, so that's a very quick overlook, very quick look at what the methodology entails for a person who just has to perform the field work. Yes, when we look at how to plan the audit, likely when you attend it next year in audit level 2, then we will go into this in a lot more detail. When we look at finalization, then we will look at it in terms of the conclusion part of how do I finally end up at the point where I can say I've tested enough and I can sign off my audit report. That we will do in finalization. But for now, I think this introduction is sufficient. And of course, again, I want to remind you, go and watch the video on the work program conclusion as well in your online or e-learning module. All right, just finishing off then, I want to remind you of what is up next in your track schedule for level 1, the module 2 then. Remember also module 1's video about inventory count. If you've not yet watched that, go and have a look at that also to help you for your inventory counts. And then the next time we are going to touch base through a webinar will be on the 13th of March. And that one will be a 3-hour webinar. So it's just a day that we're doing a 2-hour session. On the 13th of March, we're going to do 3 hours. And I'm really hoping that the majority of you would have worked through more of the videos by then so that we can just touch base and just tie up any of the loose ends about some of those case studies. Right, so that is then the session for today. Thank you very much for joining us. I want to ask if you can please also just complete the post-course evaluation. That's really just for today's session. You can either follow the QR code, and I will also post the link. Let me just get that link. I will also post the link in the Oh, there we go. That's done. I will also post the link in the chat. So you can either follow the link from the chat or through the QR code. Just a few short questions to ask you about how you experienced today's session. And then, then you are ready to go. And I'm already looking forward to the next session on the 13th of March. If you have any trouble, any problem, any questions, please, you're welcome to complete the answer or submit a question in the chat now. You can even go back to I think you should be able to go back to the main room. We ask people to also just stay there for anybody that has any trouble. But if you can give us some feedback about today's session in that form, that will be very helpful. I will have a look as to how many people are still around. And then if there are if the majority of people who ask questions, anything like that has left, then I will also close the meeting. And then I'm looking forward to seeing you on the 13th of March. Thank you for your attendance today. Thank you for your participation, and have a fantastic rest of the Friday. Goodbye.